And hello, my dear friend. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Book Talks with Keith. And I'm so very thankful to have you there with us. Don't forget to share this podcast with family, friends, the milkman, the postman, dog walker, anybody you can. Let's spread the news about this podcast and the love of books, shall we? So I would appreciate your help in that. One of the purposes, as you know, of this podcast is to bring you fantastic authors every single week to share a little bit about themselves and the work that they have put out to the world. And I've got another wonderful author with me today, and her name is Rachel Grosvenor. And Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. And everybody's going to recognize the accent. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way. Where do you reside? And is that where the accent comes from?
Well, I live in Wales, in the UK, in a little town called Dolgellau. But I'm from Birmingham, UK, which is about 3 hours away from where I live now.
Okay. Well, now we know exactly where that accent comes from. I didn't know if you were still living in the UK or if you had moved to the United States or some other place. So thank you for that. One of the things that I really believe is important is for readers to get a chance to know a little bit about authors. Now, some authors think differently, but I want people to know about me. And I like for them to know about the people I bring on the show. So, would you be kind enough to just share across the table with someone you're talking to? Tell a little bit about yourself if you can, Rachel.
Of course, yeah. So, well, my name is Rachel, and I primarily write fantasy stories. Sometimes I drift into other realms, but I am really inspired basically by the scenery around me, and I always have been. So, I was brought up near Sarehole Mill, which is where Tolkien lived. And they had Lord of the Rings weekends there every year, and you'd go and everyone would dress up and you'd walk through the woods where he kind of created all these ideas. And it was a huge part of my childhood. Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, The Hobbit. So I always wanted to be a writer because that was the most exciting thing I could possibly think of.
I can
So
imagine growing up in that environment for sure.
yeah. So yeah, that's really where I kind of started my journey as a way was writing Lord of the Rings fan fiction. A lot of writers get into writing fan fiction, and I'm no exception. So
That's great. That's great. And your family life? Are you just do you are you married? Do you have kids? Do they did they support your writing or did they make it difficult on you? What's the case there?
no, I've got a very supportive husband and a very large dog. And last year he was a puppy, a very large puppy, and he made it quite difficult to write. But now he's a bit older, it's easier. But my husband has always been incredibly supportive of me. And I've been very lucky to have an amazing mother who has always, even when I was tiny, said, if you want to write, let's do it. You know, she supported me the whole way. And she's always the first to read whatever I write.
Mm.
Yeah, and I really couldn't have done it without her, actually. I dedicated my debut to her, and she's just wonderful.
It's so it just goes to show how important it is to have people who will support us in our dream to write and become authors and being there to support us. And yes, even during those early days when our writing is pretty bad perhaps, they're there to encourage us on. And so I'm happy she was there for you. That's a wonderful thing. Have you always, now you said that you were drawn to this style of writing. Is that pretty much most of what you've done in your life, or have you ventured out in the other types?
So I have ventured out. My first novel was literary fiction, and it
Okay.
was a heavy. It's a heavy read. It was a heavy write. It's a very challenging novel which hits upon some difficult subjects, and it took me about 4 years to write. And actually, by the end of it, I was exhausted. I was exhausted, and
Imagine.
I sort of ran out of that joy of writing. So
Mhm.
with my second novel, which ended up being my debut, I started writing it just to have fun again because I was like, you know what? I need to have fun again with this. I need to remember why I got into this in the beginning.
Mm,
Uh,
mhm.
and I do think actually that that kind of helped me develop my voice more. It helped me. write in a way that I'd never written before. I don't know if you've ever read any Terry Pratchett.
Not personally, no.
He has an amazing style of writing that is, it's kind of like having a conversation with somebody. It's
Mm,
very dry wit and it's really fun to read because of that.
mhm.
Um, I love Terry Pratchett. I think he's a master of storytelling. And I was really inspired by that tone of voice as well, sort of like you're sharing a secret with the reader. And I
Mhm.
love that style of writing. So I have continued to write more in that style since I wrote my first novel. Like I'm sitting opposite from a reader, kind of saying, sit down, let me tell you a story, you
Sort of
know?
how I like to make this podcast, because as I told you before I ever hit the record button, I really want people to feel like we're, the three of us, you,
Yeah.
me, and the listener, are sitting around in a coffee shop and just chatting about things that we love, meaning books in this case. So I
Yeah.
can see how the joy of writing that way. And now, when you write that, what person do you normally find yourself drawn to in that writing style?
So I write in third person, usually third person omniscient.
Hmm, okay.
So I'm currently on my sixth novel.
Wow.
And third person omniscient is the most comfortable for me because it's like telling a story. And I usually take these bits out in editing, but I do kind of in the first draft, I always say things like, dear reader, come closer, because it helps me access that.
Hmm.
But I do take those bits out afterwards, but I feel like it still has that same feeling. And I know they're not popular now, but I'm someone who loves a prologue and an epilogue as well. I love them.
Yeah.
Um, and I treat myself to putting some in my work as well because that's what I enjoy. So
There you go. I mean, some of the most recent books that I've actually picked up and read recently have had especially epilogues, but some prologues, but a lot of epilogues. I don't know if they ever go out of style. I know a lot of people think, oh, there's no need for them, but I don't know. I kind of like them sometimes, especially if there's a lengthy time in between sort of the end of the book formal and then, of course, the epilogue, for instance. So I don't
yeah,
know.
it's interesting. I think it kind of depends on what kind of story you like to read, I suppose, and where you see yourself as a reader. In my house, I like to light the fire and sit down of an evening with a good book.
Mhm.
And that kind of creates those cozy kind of moments that I'm always reaching for as a reader. And I
Yes,
think I'm always trying to give a reader when I'm writing as well.
I get it.
Mm.
I don't know about you. I mean, I've got two active series that I'm writing now, and I go back and forth, which is an exercise in mental frustrations at times. But I, I I find that when I write in first person, I can actually express a little more of what
Mm.
you were describing a moment ago. So I'm a little different in that because I feel like it comes out in my character in this series. So I'm able to express that thoughts and the deeper ideas, from the first person perspective. So I think it's interesting that people approach it from such different ways. And I could see in your case, it's like that secret little storyteller that's going to say, hey, I know something you don't know. Pay
Yeah,
attention. I'm going to tell you, right? That's what you're
yeah,
getting at. I get it. I get it.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
tell me more about your books. I mean, you said you're writing your sixth now, did you say?
Mhm.
All
Yeah.
right. So tell me about the other five and tell me about the one that you're writing now.
Yeah. So, well, my debut came out in August last year. And that was the second novel that I wrote. And since then, my third and my fourth novel, I'm currently querying. So I'm not approaching agents, I'm approaching indie publishers because my first novel was published with an indie publisher and they're just so fantastic. And they can do all the stuff the big publishers can do. Um, and when you call them up, you reach the CEO, I love that. I love talking to the people who have a stake in what you're doing and they have a passion for what you're doing because of that. That really matters to me. So my third and fourth novel are their companion novels, essentially. So they're not necessarily sequels to each other because they can exist separately from each other, but they are in the same world. Doesn't really kind of matter what order you read them in. But
That was a little
they,
Star Wars there for
yeah,
you know,
they
because
also kind of go hand in hand.
yeah, I mean, like they all go together in the story, but yeah, they gave us the middle before they gave us the beginning. So yeah, so I get that. So the first one, your debut novel, is not part of this same sort of place. It's independent in itself.
It is. So yeah, it's called the Finery. It is set in a world called, it's a land called Ritter, and the capital of Ritter is Finer Bay. Um, it is fantasy dystopian, essentially. Um, it's about a 100-year-old woman taking down a totalitarian government with a wolf sidekick.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fantasy dystopian. It's very much for adults. Um, and it's based on very real stuff, very real stuff. I based the actions of the government on Stalin's 5-year plan, some laws they've passed in the UK, and some of the responding that governments around the world had to the COVID situation. So the things that happen in the book are real, but it's in a fantastical setting.
I understand.
Yeah.
So, what is Rachel? What is your background, if I may ask?
Mm.
Because you know, every author has one, but I'm interested in yours.
So I did my undergrad, MA, and PhD in creative writing.
Okay.
And then I was a lecturer at university and I taught adults creative writing as well for the council. And then I had a big life shift, as everybody did, in 2020, when I went on my honeymoon to New Zealand, and the borders closed. And we were like, oh, okay, well, here we are. What are we going to do about that then? And we ended up being there for 2 years.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And it was amazing and difficult and wonderful and inspiring and all these crazy things. And, you know, to go back to Lord of the Rings, the films were made there. So I actually went to Hobbiton and I went to Hobbiton on Hobbit Appreciation Day, which is the 22nd of September, and there's this huge celebration, and
Wow.
it was so fantastic. And I was so moved by the scenery every day that when we came back to the UK, we tried to find New Zealand in the UK, which is how we ended up where we are in Wales. So I live at the base of a mountain called Cadair Idris, and it's the most beautiful place, and that inspires me every single day.
So from university life, you've dedicated yourself completely to your writing now. Is that the case?
Yeah, I'm also an editor and writing coach,
Okay.
because, to make money from writing alone is a task in
It's
itself.
difficult. Yes, it is.
Yeah. But also because I love helping other people write, basically, and find their voice. It's really important to me. And it's really important to me for the same reason that I'm actually going to like a local school next week to talk to 7 and 8-year-olds about being an author, because not everybody has that support that I had. And something has always stuck with me. My best friend, who I love to bits, but when we went to do undergraduate degrees, she was doing politics and I was doing creative writing. And she said to me, I can't believe your mom is letting you do that. My parents would never. And I've never forgotten that, because I thought, yeah, imagine if they'd said, you're not going into the arts, don't be ridiculous, you
You got
know?
to do, yeah, you got to do something to make that money. You got to do something to give you a good, solid career. Of course, I mean, you were on a track doing that. I mean, getting your degrees and your PhD and becoming a professor and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a good living. That's a reputable job, of course. But that passion is still there to spend most of your time writing. I know.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I can appreciate that. Do you ever hope to get back to New Zealand? Is that on your bucket list to go back?
Absolutely. First of all, the people are just some of the warmest people I've ever met. Really, they are. And I made some really good friends there. And we still talk, but it would be wonderful to go back and see everybody. And also the wine is fantastic and the food is amazing and all that stuff too.
It's with you when you were talking about it. It sort of reminded me of a young person in the United States being, it would be like the person who go into Disney World. They're in heaven because, Disney World, Mickey has been their whole dream of growing up and they wind up in Disney World. You sort of had that same look on your face when you were saying, I was here. I was here when they made the movies.
Yeah.
I was inundated in the spirit of this. So
Yeah.
that's so cool. So I can certainly see based on your childhood and your exposure in Tolkien and your to New Zealand, where the passion in that comes from. So your book number, did you publish the book, second book, the one that was sort of a real difficult write and a tiring write? Did you ever publish that book?
So that sits on the shelves of the University of Birmingham Library. That was what I used for my PhD thesis.
Okay.
In that sense, I very much see it as having done its job.
Hmm.
The thought of getting it down off that bookshelf and working on it again is just not. And also that was what I graduated in 2016. And I've changed as a writer since then. And so I mean we change all the time as writers, don't we?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to focus now on the things that I really have a passion for writing. So yeah, you can tell when you're reading something that somebody was passionate about writing, you can tell.
You can. Even if it's nonfiction, you can tell because you can,
Yes.
either fiction or nonfiction, their voice comes out. Their
Yeah.
what's inside of them comes out on the page if they've done their job and they are passionate about their writing.
Yeah.
So the one you have out is a fantasy fiction, the
Mhm.
second and third books, which you are in the process of hopefully getting those out. Do you think you'll be able to get those out in 2024, or do you have any guess
I
on
mean,
that?
I'd love to. I'd love to. They're Wild West fantasy, which is super fun. And
Well,
yeah, I
that's
would love to.
different than that sounds a lot
Yeah.
different than what you wrote before.
Yeah, it is different, which is another reason I love an indie publisher, because when you get an agent, they're like, you wrote a romance book. And so what's your next romance book? Because the readers are expecting a certain thing. Whereas when you say, you know what, I'm going to allow myself to go for different things here, you can explore and expand and write in different ways. So yeah.
Yes, yeah, I get that for sure. Um, so the book you're writing now, what type of how does it fit into all of this?
Yeah, it's a witchy medieval fantasy.
Whoa! So we've gone from I'm trying to catch up here, Rachel. Okay, so the first one we've got the 100-year-old
Yeah,
lady who is with a was it wolf? You said,
a wolf,
yeah.
her wolf sidekick. Yeah,
All right, and then we have two fantasy western style,
yeah.
and now we are. What are we doing again now?
Medieval witchcraft fantasy. Yeah. The thing they have in common is they all have magical elements. And this is the thing,
Okay.
whatever I write, it's hard for me to stay away from those
Yeah.
magical elements.
Well,
Uh,
that's because that's what you love. That's what you were inspired as such a young child. And when we are inspired by something, it's going to make its way in our writing. I don't care if I'm writing a romance or a murder mystery. Who I am is still going to come out on the page. And I know it's
yeah.
the same for you as well. And I could see if you're going to watch this on YouTube, my friend, you're going to see the smile on her face when she's talking about these books and the joy that's radiating as she brags on this work that she's poured her heart into. So I appreciate that. I can see it on your face. So that's great, Rachel. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And the book that's out now, let's say it again, because we're going to make
Yeah,
sure, dear listener, and if you're on YouTube, she's going to hold it up. There it
I'm
is.
on
She's
that.
holding it up. The
Yeah,
Finery, the
yeah, the
Finery.
Finery. And it's by Fly on the Wall Press. They are a wonderful ethical publisher in the UK. They're based in Manchester. They're really fantastic and they do amazing things for northern writers. They're brilliant. Um, and they have a lot of exciting stuff coming out as well. So yeah, they're definitely one to watch. But The Finery is a fun read. It's hard to say that you're writing about a tyrannical government, but it's fun. But that is the case. That is the case.
If you say so, Rachel, I believe you. You intrigued me to wonder how that works, but okay.
Yeah, yeah. And her name is Professor Wendowleen Cripcot. She's 100 years old and she's a badass. And I started writing about her because she came to me before anything. And it was really because the older I get, I'm going to be 40 soon. The older I get, the more confident I am in myself and my voice and just standing up for myself, saying what I think. And I thought, God, by the time I'm 100, I'm going to say whatever I want. I'm going to be a badass. And then she came to me in a flash, and I was like, that's who my next main character is. So there she is.
I hear you. I tell people all the time, my goal was to live long enough so that I can eat what I want and say what I want and not have to worry about it. That's really not
Excellent.
true, but I say that sometimes. But anyway, my wife would not appreciate either one of those statements. But anyway, um, so in addition to the writing, you mentioned it earlier, and I want to make sure that people hear this because there's a lot of people I hope that are going to be listening to this podcast, whether the day it comes out live or in weeks or months afterward, who are also passionate about their writing and want to get their books published and all this kind of stuff. So I know you mentioned early on that you were also a writer's coach and an editor. So let's take just a moment for you to share a little bit about that and what you do for
Yeah.
authors to be, so that we can help them in that capacity as well.
Absolutely. So, as a writer and an editor and a writing coach, I meet other authors where they're at. So, it doesn't matter if you've got like an idea, but you're not sure how to develop it, whether you're in the murky middle of a novel, which we all know is one of the suckiest places to be, and you're struggling to see a way out, or whether you've finished your first draft, but you're not sure what's next. I have different packages to suit people at whatever stage they're in, basically. And through online coaching on Zoom and through editing their work that they send to me, we basically come up with something together that they're really proud of. Because I actually believe that everybody has the ability to tell their story. It's just about being given the right support and the right skill set.
Right.
Um, and support is a key word there because a lot of people come to me bruised by the style of feedback that they've been given in the past by teachers, or various people in their lives who have read something they've written and haven't given them feedback correctly. But actually, first of all, not everybody's feedback matters, because if they're not your ideal reader, if they don't read, who cares what they think about your work?
Mhm.
But secondly, not everyone is trained to give feedback. So I trained for a year and a half to be a coach, and I'm qualified, and that means that I give skills-based feedback, and we do strengths-led coaching essentially. So you understand what it is that you need to improve, but you never feel down about it. You feel enthused to do it. We always talk through examples. I always work with people and figure out, okay, but how can we move forward? This bit's amazing. How can we make it even stronger? That's really important.
Sure,
Um,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah. So it's I've got some writers who are working on trilogies. I've got some writers who are working on novellas. It's a totally different kind of spectrum. But I am on Readsy as well, which is a great website for finding editors and writing coaches and things.
Okay. And one of the things I want to make sure that I have in the show notes, is your contact information. We're going to certainly put the link to her active novel so you can find it. And we'll put the connections to you, Rachel, in your social media and your website.
Lovely.
I assume you have one of those as well.
Yeah.
So we'll do all that and make sure that if anybody is in need of that services, that they have someone that they can go to. So there you go, my dear author to be listening to this podcast. There's another good resource for you. So not only are we bringing you great books for you to read, but if you really want to write, we're trying to help you there too. So here's another person who can give you some assistance in this process. Rachel, I thank you for that very much. Is
Thank
there
you.
anything as we wrap this up, and I have certainly enjoyed talking to you. It's been a privilege and an honor to talk to you. Thank you for coming on. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the person out there that either is just a reader or an author to be, or both, and something from your heart that you would like to share with them as we end today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And actually, I think if there's any authors to be out there who are wondering whether or not they can do it, I would ask you to just take a moment and write down 5 things that you're really proud of in your life. and see what you've achieved. You absolutely can write a novel. I know it's intimidating, but I promise you, if you write down those 5 things and put them next to your computer, you're going to see what you're capable of. And that's an awesome thing.
There you go. Spoken like a true teacher, a good teacher. Thank you, Rachel, for that. I appreciate it. And you stay on the line after we stop recording. We'll do a couple of housekeeping things if you would. Thank you again. I am glad that you were raised where you were raised. I'm glad you had that experience, and I'm glad that you found this passion that you have for writing in this way and in this genre. And I hope that people will go and find this book and enjoy reading how these two things go together. She said they do. She said it's got some humor in it. So there you go. Take her at her word and go check it out. All right, listener, thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. Until next time, please let's just share the love of reading and the value in those books. Until next time, bye bye.